After visiting the warehouse situated on the docks in the least reputable area of Brixdale, Leroy and Lamar experienced significant anger and frustration. Upon their arrival, they discovered the warehouse was deserted. There were no signs of activity. If the Kingpin had been present, he had departed without leaving any traceable evidence. Consequently, their pursuit of answers and the search for the Kingpin remained unresolved. Leroy floated silently in the corner of the abandoned parking garage, his translucent figure illuminated by the flickering overhead light. He remembered the time when he and Lamar used to hide out in these very garages as kids. They played dice games with other neighborhood hustlers, always hoping to scrape together enough money to buy a little piece of happiness. It seemed a lifetime ago, maybe because it literally was. Now, cold and enraged, Leroy hovered above the grease-stained pavement, waiting for Lamar to return. And then at last, Lamar phased through the cracked concrete wall, his eyes glowing with ghostly energy. "Man, I found him," Lamar said, voice tight with both excitement and apprehension. "The thug who ran?" Leroy asked, turning his spectral gaze on his friend. "Yeah, the same scrawny little bitch we cornered in that condemned row house. He's holed up at the old bus depot across town. Word on the street is that the syndicate's got muscle headed his way. They know something supernatural spooked their boy." They had pulled off their first haunting earlier that night, determined to make a statement against the Kingpin. His crime syndicate had ended their lives. Using their newfound abilities to manipulate lights and electronics, they transformed a rundown hideout into a swirling spectacle of flashing bulbs and slamming doors. Their target, an underling named Trey, who had panicked so bad he was tripping over his own feet trying to get away. Before Leroy and Lamar could press for real answers about the Kingpin, Trey vanished into the darkness, muttering, "The Kingpin won't like this." Their error became evident as soon as they allowed Trey to escape. His superiors would be alerted that someone, or something, was pursuing them. If the Kingpin indeed possessed powers or formed alliances beyond the mortal realm, then Leroy and Lamar's afterlife could present dangers similar to those they faced on the streets of Brixdale. The incident with Marcus lingered in their memory, serving as a constant reminder of the potential consequences. It didn't take them long to find Trey again. The bus depot he had chosen for sanctuary was a hollow, vandalized husk of its former self. Pale beams of moonlight filtered through broken skylights, illuminating rows of rusted benches. The distant drip of water echoed like a heartbeat, punctuating the silence. Shadows lay across the walls in twisted shapes, almost like grim spectators to the events unfolding within. Leroy and Lamar slipped through a smashed window at the depot's rear, careful not to disturb any debris. Even though they were ghosts and noise hardly mattered, they had come to appreciate stealth. Being able to blend in and watch mortals squirm was a powerful advantage, especially since they had to remain invisible if they wanted to gather intel. Trey sat near a defunct ticket counter, legs bouncing nervously as he looked around the deserted depot. He clutched a small revolver with shaky hands, the muzzle pointing at every sound, real or imagined. A dim flashlight cast ghostly beams across the peeling posters on the wall, advertising bus fares from a bygone era. Leroy edged closer, letting his presence stir the dust motes in the air. Lamar floated to Trey's other side, the tension thickening around them like a thundercloud about to burst. "We gotta do this fast, man," Lamar whispered, giving Leroy a meaningful look. "Yeah," Leroy agreed. "No more slip-ups." Summoning energy from the swirling coil of cold rage within him, Leroy focused on the flickering overhead lights. A single neon bulb above Trey's head began to strobe. Lamar channeled his own spectral power into the ticket machine, causing it to whir and spit out a stream of yellowed bus tickets. The mechanical squeal cut through the stillness like a knife, sending Trey bolting upright. "Hello? Who's there?" Trey's voice wavered, echoing off cracked tiles. Leroy let out a low, unearthly moan, just enough to set Trey's nerves on edge. Trey spun, fumbling with his revolver and nearly dropping it. Leroy felt a pulse of satisfaction. This was their chance to scare some answers out of him. But Trey was more prepared this time. Even though his hands trembled, he aimed the gun at the swirling shadows. Lamar, trying to keep the advantage, smashed a row of overhead lights, causing a shower of sparks. The muzzle flash from Trey's wild shot lit the depot in blinding brightness for a split second, but it passed harmlessly through Lamar's translucent form. "Stop messing with me," Trey shouted, desperation dripping from every syllable. "Whatever you are, please don't kill me." He choked on the last word as though he realized the horrifying truth behind Leroy and Lamar's existence. They were already dead, beyond human threat. In that instant, Lamar gave in to fury, letting his voice explode into an echoing, spectral howl. "Where's the Kingpin?" Lamar demanded, the unnatural reverb of his voice rattling the corroded benches. "Tell us what you know, or we'll tear you and your world apart." Trey backed against the wall, eyes darting frantically. "I swear I don't know nothing. The Kingpin, he'll kill me if I talk. Oh God, he'll do worse than kill me." "Worse than kill you?" Leroy asked, voice resonating with cold wrath. "What could be worse than lying dead in an alley?" At that, Trey's expression twisted from panic to near hysteria. "You don't understand. He's got connections. He's got this thing that hunts down traitors and..." Before Trey could finish, the depot's doors banged open. A group of heavily armed syndicate enforcers, wearing dark clothing and grim expressions, fanned inside. Their hardened stares showed they weren't strangers to violence. One particularly tall figure stepped forward with practiced confidence. Pablo, a known lieutenant rumored to have close ties with the Kingpin. "Trey, you worthless idiot," Pablo growled, scanning the shadowy corners. "You led us on a merry chase, didn't you? And Trey, I don't like chasing little jerk-offs like you, so you better start talking if you know what's good for you. What spooked you?" Trey's grip on the revolver tightened, and for a moment Leroy and Lamar thought he might try to fight instead of fleeing. But he simply lowered the weapon and stared at Pablo with eyes that looked half-crazed. They're ghosts, man," Trey blurted. "I swear it. Ghosts from the alley." "I saw them. They talked to me," Pablo scoffed. "You been huffing paint? Ain't no such thing as ghosts, you little twerp." But the doubt in Pablo's eyes betrayed him. Some part of him knew Bricksdale's underbelly held secrets beyond explanation, and that made him uneasy. Leroy and Lamar felt a tremor of anticipation. They had planned on isolating Trey, but now they had the attention of a top-tier syndicate bruiser. This could be their shot at forcing bigger answers. If they could withstand an entire squad of armed men. "Lamar," Leroy whispered, "we take them by surprise. Flicker the lights, distract them, and I'll handle the guns." Lamar nodded, though an icy bead of fear clung to him. Even in death, the memory of muzzle flashes and lead tearing into their bodies felt too close. Shaking it off, he concentrated on the sputtering neon tubes overhead. The lights began a haunting strobe sequence, plunging the depot into periods of near-total darkness. Between bursts of sickly white glare, the enforcers cursed, scanning the room wildly. Leroy harnessed his energy to manipulate the few remaining electronic devices. A cracked vending machine, an old radio on a desk behind the ticket counter. The radio hissed to life, blasting static and faint fragments of old news broadcasts. Candy bars and chip bags rattled inside the vending machine, slamming against the glass. This phenomenon was fantastically weird and targeted, and was working because the thugs' faces paled. "I ain't about this supernatural crap," one enforcer muttered, knuckles tight on his firearm. Pablo steadied his men with a cold glare. "Stay sharp. If it moves, shoot it." Trey, edging away from them, shouted above the pandemonium, "I told you! They're real! We gotta get out of here!" That was when Leroy made his move, phasing toward the group and knocking two guns from the enforcer's hands with a swift telekinetic shove. Both weapons slid across the floor with a nerve-splitting screech of metal on concrete. "What the hell?" an enforcer cried. Another screamed, "Oh, sweet baby Jesus, something touched me." Pablo's face grew grim, but he refused to give in to terror. He steadied his aim at the swirling shadows where Leroy drifted. Lamar directed a sudden gust of wind, an impossibility in a closed depot, slamming the bench rows forward, toppling two more gunmen. The high-pitched shrieks of metal scraping across the tiled floor mingled with the men's shouts. Gunfire erupted in half-blind blasts, ricocheting off concrete pillars and shattered windows. The muzzle flashes lit the depot like a deranged nightclub. In the chaos, Leroy and Lamar danced through the hail of bullets, incorporeal forms passing effortlessly through the volley of lead. Their ghostly eyes glowed with righteous fury as they closed in on the group, Trey took advantage of the distraction, stumbling away in a frantic attempt to escape. "Where do you think you're going?" Lamar roared, swirling around Trey. "You owe us answers!" But Trey, motivated by adrenaline and pure fear that was giving him speed, dashed towards a broken exit door. Pablo noticed Trey running and raised his weapon, intending to drop him for good. Evidently, loyalty only went so far in this syndicate. Leroy intervened, wrenching the gun up with a telekinetic jolt, causing Pablo to lose his shot. Trey, half delirious and screaming about ghosts, disappeared into the night. As Leroy and Lamar pinned Pablo's men in a vortex of flickering lights, the radio suddenly screeched, cutting through the chaos. A voice, raspy, distorted, broke through the static. "Pablo, I know you can hear me. Stand down." Every enforcer froze. Even Leroy and Lamar felt an inexplicable chill, as though an unseen presence had just materialized in the room. The voice resonated with dark authority, layered with a faint hiss that set the hair on the back of one's neck standing on end, even if that hair belonged to a ghost. "The Kingpin," Pablo muttered, sounding both reverent and terrified. He's calling in." Lamar glanced at Leroy, eyes widening. This was the moment they had been waiting for, an actual chance to connect with the criminal mastermind responsible for their deaths. Leroy drifted toward the radio, unearthly energy rippling around him. He wanted to speak, to confront the voice, but the Kingpin spoke first. "I know you're here," the voice whispered, echoing unnaturally. "You spirits who defy the laws of life and death, you've piqued my interest. Let my men go and we'll talk soon." Leroy opened his mouth to reply, but a sudden rush of static drowned him out. The lights flickered in a wave of blackness. When they flashed on again, the enforcers were staring into nothingness and had a distant, confused, and dazed look on their faces. It was as if some powerful force had severed them from the confrontation. Silently, Pablo gestured for his men to retreat, and they stumbled outside, leaving a trail of curses and panicked breaths behind. "We're not done here," Lamar shouted, voice echoing through the depot. But the men were gone, as if some trance pushed them away. "Damn it, Leroy. We almost had them." The depot was left in shambles. Broken benches, shattered glass, bullet casings, the reek of gunpowder and dread. Leroy and Lamar hovered over the carnage, rage twisting inside them. They had wanted direct answers, not more cryptic threats. "The Kingpin. He reached right into our space," Leroy said, voice trembling with residual fury, like he's got powers of his own or a connection to something not human. The radio once more suddenly sputtered to life. A faint laugh crackled through its old speaker, low and mocking, before dying away into static. Leroy's gaze snapped to Lamar. "He's taunting us," Lamar said, unable to mask the knot of fear that tightened his voice. And that was when they felt it, an icy presence, familiar yet horribly distinct, creeping along the edges of their consciousness. They remembered the twisted entity that snuffed out Marcus in the previous encounter. Was this the same sinister force, or something worse? The stale air seemed to shudder. A dark shape flickered in the far corner of the depot, a robed silhouette with hollow, hungry eyes. Leroy and Lamar froze. For one breathless moment, the shape glided toward them on tendrils of shadow. Its presence was suffocating, as though it devoured the light around it. "Leroy," Lamar whispered, voice cracking, "we gotta go." But before they could muster the strength to flee, the figure flickered out of sight. An echoing hiss lingered in its wake, carving a chill into their very souls. The lights returned to their normal dim glow, leaving the depot strangely quiet and heartbreakingly ordinary in its decay. Outside, the faint wail of sirens drifted through the night air. Either a concerned neighbor or one of Pablo's rattled men had tipped off the police. Leroy and Lamar exchanged glances. This confrontation was over for now. "What do we do next?" Lamar asked, still unsettled by the robed apparition. Leroy clenched his ghostly fists, flickers of resentment and determination warring in his eyes. "We keep going. The Kingpin wants to talk? Let him. We'll find him first and end this nightmare." Yet the question remained. How did the Kingpin hold such supernatural sway over his men? and possibly over the demonic presence skulking in the shadows. Leroy and Lamar knew their path to vengeance was tangled with something far darker than gun-toting criminals. They had awakened a sleeping supernatural force, and now it was wide awake, staring back at them from the blackened heart of Bricksdale's underworld. As the sirens closed in, Leroy and Lamar melted into the walls, drifting unseen through the city's veins of back alleys and shattered dreams. Their minds churned with questions, fueled by simmering rage. They had been killed before for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but this time they wouldn't go down so easily. They were already dead, and that gave them an edge. One way or another, the next confrontation with the Kingpin would come, and they would be ready to make him pay. But beneath their bold resolve, a quiet dread festered. The memory of that robed figure, those hollow eyes, made them wonder if their powers were truly enough to stand against the evil that lurked in Bricksdale's darkest corners. And in the far recesses of their hearts, they both wondered if their vendetta might unleash horrors beyond their control.